right, for this project, you're going to be creating that coiled vessel using at least 2 different coiling methods to build your vessel, and then whatever that creature, character, animal is going to become. So, first thing that we need to do is learn how we work with the clay in our seats. So, you're going to be using what's called a messy mat on top, and then you're going to get a wooden board and a rag on the surface. That's what we're going to store our project on. But for starters, you can kind of put the board and the rag off to the side because you're going to work directly on your messy mat. So to begin with, you are going to have a slab of clay already rolled out for you that you're going to be using to start the base of the project. So because this is a circle to start out with, you're going to be cutting a circle that's going to be a slab that you're going to attach your coils onto the surface of. So you're going to use a stencil to set on top of the slab of clay. Then you're going to have a yogurt cup with some clay tools on it. You could take the knife tool out to use to do the cutting. So this looks like a very sharp knife. It is not sharp. I am not cutting myself. I'm not hurting myself. It's just a clay cutting knife. It is very, very dull. But you never want to make a fist and stab the clay. You never want to hold the clay and stab with the knife because, yes, that can penetrate your skin, but just by cutting with normal hand pressure, it's not going to hurt you. So what you're going to do is you're going to stand the knife up tall, and then you're going to cut around the edge. So you want to use the knife to do the cutting, not the stencil itself. So if you notice, I did not press down into the stencil. I set it on top, I cut around it, I peel the stencil off, and then I can remove this extra clay. And then you want to remove this from the messy mat. You want to make sure that it's dry underneath, so if water got spilled on it, make sure you dry that off. But then what I would do is I would kind of smooth out the edges because this is the bottom surface that you're going to work with. So then you're going to set that off to the side. Really what you could do is open up your rag, lay that on your board, and then set that circle stencil on top of your rag. I would fold the rag over the top so that it's not going to start to dry out, and just set this off to the side because you need to build all your coils to get started before you attach anything. So in general, what you're going to be doing is rolling the clay or coiling the clay. So you could use your scrap pieces to work with, and I would tear the clay into a piece that's about as big as a handful of clay because you don't need anything larger than that to start to coil. And because we are coiling, you really don't need to wedge the clay very much because the process of coiling is going to wedge at the same time. So I'm going to roll this between my 2 hands to start to stretch out the clay. Then once the clay is extending beyond your hands, you can see clay past my thumb, past my pinky. Now I want to switch to my messy mat. So I want to stretch this clay to be about as wide as a pencil. So if you look at this example, you can see that these coils were about as wide as a pencil or as thick as a pencil to build my coils with. So right now, this is way too thick. You can see it's not skinny enough. So what I'm going to do is set my hands side by side, and I'm going to slowly start to roll the coil. As I roll, I'm going to separate my hands slowly, and I'm going to spread my fingers apart as I roll and separate. And that process is going to start to stretch your coil. Your goal is to try and make your coil even in thickness. So if it's thicker like it is here, I'm going to stretch just that spot. I could do this with one hand where I'm just separating my fingers and rolling. Then I might move this down, start to press and separate my fingers. And the great thing about coiling is you can build this from multiple pieces of coils. It does not have to be one long continuous piece of clay. All right, so I'm actually going to break this in half because it's starting to get a little too long. So I have 2 pieces of coils now. And now what I'm going to do is continue to roll that clay. So you can see how much the clay actually stretches just by using about a handful of clay to start with. I'm using light hand pressure. If I press too hard, the clay is just going to squish and get too flat. Okay, so that's about as thick as a pencil. So now I am going to begin to start to attach pieces of clay to that circle base. So I think that the best way to start is with a wrap. So if you look at the base, you can see that there's like horizontal lines. I wrapped the clay twice to start to make this stable and sturdy at the base. So I'm going to show you how we start to attach coils together. All right, I am going to be coming around to give you a little bit of water inside the cup. It doesn't take a lot of water. The only water you need is as much to dunk this toothbrush in the water. So what I'm going to do is take my slab that's on my piece of fabric on my project board, and I'm going to lay out my coil around the outer edge. Okay, so I'm short just a little bit right here where it doesn't connect, so I think I'm going to stretch it just a little bit more. And I could use another piece and fill in that gap, but that's all I need was just to stretch that piece of clay. Okay, so right now I've got it laying where it needs to go, but now I need to attach this piece of clay. So we're going to follow the 4 S's: score, slip, stick, smooth. So the first thing that I need to do is get my cup of water and dip my toothbrush in water so it's wet. And then I am going to remove my coil, and now I'm going to brush the surface of the clay. What's happening right now is scoring and slipping. The water in the toothbrush is making slip on the surface. Slip is like glue, and the bristles scratch the surface to make it look like Velcro. So here's what that looks like. And then I also need to score and slip on my coil. So I'm going to look at my coil, and I've got kind of a crack right here in the clay, or an uneven piece where that's the surface I'm going to score on. So the same thing, I've dipped it in water, I'm brushing the coil. I'm just going to kind of roll this over and line it up. Now, the beautiful thing about working with coils is that you want to see the detail from the side view. So now I'm on step 3, stick, score, slip, stick. So I'm going to kind of patty cake that on to make it attach, but I don't want to like smear and smudge and disappear that coil. So if you look at this sample, you can see each individual coil. I did not smear and smudge and make these disappear. You can see the individual designs where I've got wraps, I've got twists, I've got spirals, I've got twists there. So what you also want to look for though is the extra slip that needs to be wiped off. So this is step 4, which is to smooth. Really, I'm just wiping off the extra slip. Now right here, I kind of have a space between the slab of clay and my coil. I can press that over to the side, or I can smush that over so it's right on the outer edge. Okay, so I recommend that you do this at least 2 times. So I'm going to set this off to the side. I have another coil that I'm going to stretch and roll out, because I'm going to stack a second wrap on top of the first one. Because what that's doing is it's starting to build the height of your vessel, and it's making the base of your vessel or your container stronger because there's going to be contact all the way around the edge. Okay, I've rolled that out. I'm going to get it back on my board. I'm going to lay this on the edge to see if it fits. And that one's going to fit nicely. So now I have to repeat the process. Take the coil off, get my toothbrush, dip it in water. I'm going to brush this top edge where I score slip. I'm going to brush one edge of my coil, score slip, step 3 stick. So now I'm going to press this on, kind of pressing down to get it to attach. And if I want this gap to disappear, I could smooth that out and just kind of blend these edges where you can't tell there was a section that got connected together. Okay, so now when I look from the outside, you can see I've got my second wrap stacked up. You also want to kind of look for gaps and press a little more firm if you have little holes in between. All right, so that's the process of how we're going to get started with the slab of clay and then adding 2 wraps onto the surface. From here, what I want you to do is look at your rough draft design. Part of this assignment is that you're using at least 2 different coiling methods to build with. So you can do more than 2 methods, but 2 is the minimum. So I am going to show you just a variety of coiling techniques that you can use to design the rest of your coils so that you've got ideas of how you can build. All right, so I like to start by getting my coil started. So I'm going to roll that out between my hands. When it gets too long, I'm going to switch to my tabletop on my messy mat, and I'm going to stretch my fingers and separate. All right. You want to pay attention to how dry your clay is. If you start to get leather hard, you're going to notice the clay is going to start to crack on the surface. So this is starting to turn leather hard. Doesn't mean it's bad clay. It just is depending on what method you want to work with. Wrapping the clay, which is just making a ring like this, that's perfectly fine. However, if you're going to try to do something like a spiral or a wave, that might cause your clay to break apart. So I would just test it and to see what happens. If I'm going to spiral my clay, what I want to do is bend one end and then just start to roll it like a cinnamon roll. So my clay was about as wide as my pencil to start with, so now I can start to roll this. And it just depends on how big you want your coil to become. You can tear the clay and make it smaller if you need a tiny spiral, or you can roll a longer piece and make a bigger spiral. So now that this is rolled up, I'm going to get my toothbrush and I'm going to score slip where the end of that is going to attach. So I'm going to stick that together where that attached, and then I'm just going to set this off to the side. So you're probably going to need maybe 6, 10, 15 coils. It depends on the size that you're working with. I would make them individually before you start to attach them. So what you could do is set your spiral on the edge and then look at it from the top and kind of visualize how many more pieces are you going to need to complete the rest of the design. So that's spiraling. Another method that you can do, take a small piece of clay, roll it in your hands, switch to your desktop, and I prefer to stand working up. I think it's easier to stand up to work. You might find it's more comfortable to stand, but you can stay seated if that is easier also. Okay, so I've stretched it so it is about as wide as my pencil. Now I'm going to work with waves of spirals, or sorry, waves of coils. So what I'm going to do is bend the clay back and forth like this to start to create a wave. So it could stay like this where you have holes in between, or you could fill in the gaps with some dots. So I'm going to score slip. I'm going to brush here, stick that on, brush there, stick that on. And then if I want to fill in some gaps, I can take tiny pieces of clay, roll it in my hands, so I have a little tiny dot of clay, and then I can stick that inside. Now that's too big, it's still not going to fit, so I'm going to tear that in half, and I'm going to stick that in between. So I start to fill in the spaces. And then maybe there's a dot here to fill that in. So I can pick this up as a set. I can switch over to my vessel. I can attach where it's standing up tall like this, or I could lay it sideways where it's like that. And then I'm going to continue to build around and around and around with more waves. Another method is to twist your clay. So I'm going to stretch this out. And I'm starting to get a slimy spot on my messy mat, so I'm just going to use my rag to dry that up, because if it's too wet, it's going to make your clay stick to your messy mat. Okay, so I'm going to take 2 coils, and I'm just going to twist them together. I might put them side by side, and then just kind of wrap one around the other, kind of twist. The longer your coil, the more it's going to wrap around, but then the same process, score, slip, stick, smooth, where you can stack up some wraps. You could do the same process with 3 strands where you're braiding the clay, and you are welcome to make up your own methods of working with clay. So the process is coiling, but if you've figured out another method, go for it. Be creative. So if I have 3 pieces, over 1 piece, goes to the middle. Outer edge, fold it over, goes to the middle. Opposite side, fold it over to the middle, fold it over to the middle. So this is how you can start to braid with coils of clay. So that's enough to get you started. At the end of class, here's what we're going to do. You're going to open up your project board, and you're going to set your fabric on your board, and then you're going to set your clay project on top, and any pieces of clay that you have rolled that you want to save, that you haven't attached yet, you're going to keep those on your project board. Clay that you're not using, you're going to put back in the clay bucket. Then you're going to have a water bottle that you're going to spray the rag and the clay piece, and you're going to gently fold your rag over the top, kind of spray the top of the rag, and then what you're going to do is get your plastic bag. You are going to pick up this entire board, and you're going to stick it inside your plastic bag. You want to push out the extra air, and then instead of tying a knot, all you're going to do is fold the extra underneath, and then you're going to set this on your assigned shelf. Then what we'll be doing is cleaning off our clay tools. You can kind of rinse things in your cup of water. You have an extra rag to wipe stuff off. You'll dump the water out in the sink, but then what you're going to do is you're going to keep all these tools in your container with your project shelf. So these containers are yours. You're not sharing the tools. They're going to be stored on the project shelf for next class.